My time volunteering at a domestic abuse shelter was really educational. The entire experience was more so about teaching us how to be there for the victim and kind of help support them and guide them through both the legal process and the recovering process. So a lot of my tasks were geared towards gaining more education on what it really means to be a service provider. So I went through a lot of what they called them modules, and I learned about like what a service provider really does for the victims, as far as doing an assessment to kind of see what's happened to them, what their state of mind is like, if they have the right support system, if they need other resources, things like that. And the modules contained a lot of information on what it means to be a service provider, as well in the legal terms. So I had to learn a lot about litigation and negligent torts and things of that nature, to kind of get a better understanding of what goes on in the courtroom, and not just be kind of like an emotional support person. So I really had to kind of learn, again, the legal system, how it works, what I can and cannot say to a victim. So I cannot give legal advice, but I can kind of say, these are some good lawyers to speak to, or these are some good places to visit as far as getting like legal advice, or legal references rather. And it did really cover a lot of litigation for the first part of the sessions, within the modules. Later on, we did talk more about the psychology aspect of it, and so the ways that this experience related to psychology and the law was, they were showing us the proper steps to go again through the legal case without crossing any lines. But it also went really in depth into PTSD and battered woman syndrome. So we did learn about PTSD in class, absolutely. But the one thing that at least I don't remember being covered, and not to this extent, I think this is the first time that I've ever really seen this depth of information on post-traumatic stress disorder, was that there are two types of how, I guess, it works. So the first type is like a one-time event. So the murder of a loved one, or a plane crash or a car crash, things like that. The other section was repeated or frequent events. So being in an abusive relationship, consistent molestation, things of that nature. And so that kind of opened my eyes to what PTSD is, to like what it can mean to different people and how it can affect different people. And so what really stood out to me was one line where they say, it's not about how we understand PTSD, but it's about how they feel it, like what they're going through and what their symptoms are. Like, I think the main focus of that was to say that PTSD is kind of broad in a sense. So you can experience aspects of it without experiencing every symptom of PTSD, or you can experience a minor car collision, but to you that was really traumatic. So to me, I may see you get an offender bender and say, yeah, that's not really traumatic, you can't have PTSD from that. But from you being in the minor fender bender, it could have been really traumatic, and it could have really altered your psychology and kind of have you lose like a sense of autonomy in that way. And so for that could be a PTSD onset for whoever is in that fender bender. And so that really stuck with me, is that I can't define whether you have PTSD or not based on my perception of what you went through. It's based on the victim or the person that went through it. And I really liked that about this module. But in general, my experience with volunteering was really educational, and there's not too much more that I can say about it, because it wasn't as hands-on as I expected it to be. But I do appreciate that they make you go through a lot of learning, because I think there may be like a misconnection with volunteering and what goes into it. Some people may think that volunteering, you jump in the first day and you start talking to the victims and things like that. but this place required you to get a lot of knowledge, a lot of education, not just on the legal system or PTSD, but also on assessing the victim and how you can speak to them, how you can't speak to them, and like communication barriers. So for instance, if there's a language barrier, that would just be like a conversational barrier. But if there's a barrier between me and the victim, so let's say like the victim went through just being abused by her husband, and I too was abused by a husband, then that would be a service barrier, which I guess I never really thought about. But like for these reasons, I really did enjoy that my community service was so education oriented, because it really did help me better understand all of what goes into being a service provider.